Hello and welcome. Today, UCL Fintech Society are delighted to have Shefali Roy, former CCO and CEO of Truelayer, Susanne Chishti, CEO of Fintech Circle, and Stani Kulechov, CEO of Aave. Without further ado, I will hand over to you guys to perhaps go around and introduce yourselves. If you could talk a little bit about your current role, if there is a typical day, what a typical day looks like for you, and the kind of things you're working on at the moment, that would be fantastic. So Shefali, could you start?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Hi. If you can't hear me, just let me know. And I'm sorry it's a bit dark where I am. It's just that it's 1 o'clock in Australia. I'm in Australia right now. And so I'm at my parents' house having a bit of a summer break. And so I'm trying to be quiet so I don't wake them up. So if you can't hear me, let me know and I'll speak a bit louder. Yeah, as Amelia was saying, I'm the ex-COO and CCO, the Chief Compliance Officer at Truelayer. I finished up there after 3 years in September. And so at the moment, basically, I'm just taking a bit of a break, spending summer in the Southern Hemisphere, which is quite nice. And day job wise, I kind of do a bit of angel investing and I kind of do a little advising with startups and consulting with startups. And so for the moment, I'm kind of just trying to take a easy break till the new year and then think about something new next year. But that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Perfect, thank you. We'll definitely dive more as we go on into your previous roles and how you've got to where you are today. But perhaps now we can go to Stani. Could you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Stani Kulechov. I'm the founder and CEO of Aave. So Aave is practically a financial technology and actually software development company in the sense that we contribute in building decentralized financial protocols that are working on with the blockchain technology. And practically, Aave was started roughly 3 years ago as a kind of like more of a community project, and it started to grow as a community. And our first product basically was a money market where you can deposit various cryptographic assets and earn interest on them, which is radically different in the sense that usually you just hold those assets in market exposure. And interesting about our technology is that we use so-called smart contracts, which is basically a piece of code that is deployed in the blockchain network that can't be changed. So it removes this kind of like a trust aspect. Before that, I actually I was studying law and graduated as a lawyer and worked in the legal industry a bit. And so before actually starting in law, I used to develop fintech applications very much related to finance. So it's been always kind of like in my bloodstream, the fintech. Glad to be here.
Fantastic, thank you. And Susanne?
Yes, so thank you very much, Emilia, for inviting me and for joining all of you today. So I'm Susanne Chishti. I'm the CEO and the founder of Fintech Circle. Originally, I'm Austrian, so I went to study in Vienna in Austria, and then I came after business school. I was studying in Berkeley in California, and then I worked in the Silicon Valley, in the tech for a tech company before I returned back to Vienna, and then more than 20 years ago, I moved to London. And then worked in finance, in the banking sector, before launching Fintech Circle 5 years ago. And what Fintech Circle does, a couple of things. On one side, we invest in fintech startups. So our goal is to find the best fintech entrepreneurs with the best ideas, the best business models, and the best teams which we can back as an angel network. So we are in Europe, we are the only angel network which only invests in fintech startups. The second thing we do is fintech education. So I enjoy writing, and I'm the editor of 7 books now, actually. So 7 fintech books. They're published by Wiley, the US publishing house. The latest book is called Fintech for Dummies, which you might know, the Dummy series from Wiley. And we are a team of 5 co-authors, and all our other books are crowdsourced, which basically means we go out to Fintech Circle's global community, which is now about 130,000 people already, and reach out for the best thought leaders, the best experts, and ask them if they would like to become a co-author for our books. And the other thing, I guess, what we have done just this week, we announced our first film, and the first fintech film, which is about the future of fintech, the future of finance. And it's a co-production with ITN, the ITN TV studios here in the UK. And so we're very excited to have a film now. And so it's easy, I guess, for people, especially now, in our coronavirus pandemic year, I guess, to watch films and to watch and to learn, through online education, online insights as well. So very glad to be here and looking forward to meet all of, the students, Emilia, and all your colleagues and your peers. And I am sure that it was a difficult year for many of you guys because you couldn't celebrate, graduations. You couldn't celebrate in public like normally. But I hope 2021 will be better. We'll be all back normally to back to normal, hopefully, for most of you guys and for us as well. So, but very nice to be here.
Yeah, certainly it's been a interesting year, to say the least, I think, for everyone. But I think there are benefits in that we can connect this way and have everyone here virtually. The film sounds very, very interesting. I'll certainly make sure to check that out. Shefali, you've had a very interesting professional career leading up to your role at Truelayer, which I know that you are no longer in, but leading up to that, you worked in many different firms across the fintech industry. Could you perhaps talk a little bit about your professional career to give people an idea of the kind of career they might have?
Sure, happy to. So I started my career actually in investment banking and in finance. And so I'm an economist by education. And so my first job was actually in Australasia with HSBC. And I worked here for a number of years and worked in Australia and Asia and worked as an economist, but then also worked in operations in the private bank and in compliance and regulatory affairs. And so I did that for quite a few years before going over to London because I did a master's at the LSE. So I know it's down the road from you guys, but it's not a bad university. So I went there, studied, finished up, and then I joined Goldman. And I was at Goldman Sachs for a while. It was my first job in Europe. It was kind of fantastic. Goldman's is a really great firm. And if you're one of those types of people who, you're wildly ambitious and you want to work at the best, and they are some of the best thinkers I've ever worked with. And so I would encourage all of you, if you can have a stint, whether even if it's a summer associateship or something, and do a couple of months at Goldman's, in any department at Goldman's, whether it's IMD or IBD or whatever it might be, even in the technology team, you should, because you then get to see what a 5-star masterclass in banking is. And so Goldman's was really exciting. It was really phenomenal, and it was kind of like a really great prep to what banking truly is and what that world is of finance and how fast-paced it could be. But also it gives you an idea of how big corporates work, because I think there's this natural tendency, and I think given you're the entrepreneurial club and all that sort of stuff, there's a natural tendency to go, I want to go join a startup and all this stuff. And that's wonderful and it's terrific. But if you do have an opportunity to see what a global company does and how it works, I would say try as desperately as you can to kind of do a short stint at Goldman's, or even a long stint, but do one, because it really shows how it works. I left Goldman's just around the financial crisis in 2008, actually, because at that point, banking had get kind of boring. It was overregulated. It was just not as innovative as possible. I also have studied an undergraduate in art history. And so there was an opportunity to pivot completely. And I moved into the art world, and I joined Christie's, who are the auction house. And again, very interesting business. They are, again, if you're looking at business models in your world and when you're designing your own startups and all this sort of stuff, the Christie's business model is something to be examined and something to be learned from, because they get a cut from the buyer and the seller, which is crazy when you think about, the modern day business and the modern day company. And they do it all legitimately, which is phenomenal. So if you ever start, a B2B marketplace or a B2C marketplace or a platform, there's parallels that you can draw from different sectors, different industries to kind of shape your thinking about how you think about pricing or how you think about commerce. And that Christie's was phenomenal to do that. And it was a really, really great business. I left Christie's after a couple of years and then joined Apple. And Apple, I joined them as a chief compliance officer. And so I straddled London and San Francisco and worked across the world for them and handled everything outside of America. Apple is, I don't know if you're a Samsung users, I'm sorry about this, but to say this is, Apple is everything you think it is. I mean, in terms of the outside inside kind of impression, they're spectacularly innovative, they're very creative, they're very lean, the way they design a business, the way they make money, the way they build their products. If you're a fan, to actually inside to see it all is really eye-opening and stunning. I was there for many years, and then this little company called Stripe called me and said, hey, listen, do you want to join this company? And I did what it was, and I did what it did, and it was very small. So when I joined Stripe in Europe, we were only about 5 or 6 people here and about 80 globally. And we were really young and phenomenal. I've never worked at a small company before, and so I thought this is a really great opportunity. And they're trying to disrupt PayPal, which I don't know, they might not do it. And so it was an opportunity to just really go to bare bones, start a company, help them grow and build in Europe and Asia and Australia, and a bit of America as well. And so I was at Stripe for a few years, helping them really build and solidify all of their frameworks and infrastructure. Now Stripe's not itty bitty anymore. It's $1 or something. So it's a pretty. So I finished up after 3 years, and then I joined Truelayer. Who are aware, it's in open banking, it's in PSD2, and it's effectively intermediary transaction and infrastructure layer that gives you access to the bank for, if you're a third-party application, banking data, which so they sit in the middle and they're intermediary. And so I was CEO there. I was the 4th employee, and the job was really help them scale and build and grow. And then in the end, when I joined Truelayer, I think we had recommend we were 5 or 6 people, and we're just under 200 people and about 70 million funding. So sorry, I was very, but I thought I'd just give you this quick overview of what I did and where I was. And so I only finished up Truelayer in September, and that's really all.
Yeah, that's fantastic overview. We'll definitely talk more about each of those. That's perfect, thank you. So Stani, you mentioned before that you studied law and you worked as a lawyer. I think it would be really interesting for the people who are watching who perhaps don't study something technology or finance related to hear about your experience coming from a law background. And do you think that perhaps gave you an edge in some way when you were starting up your company?
Yeah, it's actually interesting because I always kind of like considered to be more of a software person and kind of like a product person, and always thought that maybe there will be always kind of like a startup in my life that I will try to kind of like pursue. And I think I started to develop quite early in my teen years. I think I started to code when I was 12, 13 years old, and all the way until I think to my early 20s. And what was fascinating is that code is like logic and mathematics, in the sense that you can get a kind of like a true answer for a logical calculation that you want to receive. And then there was kind of like a big part of this, not just fintech, but also in development and product development, where a lot of things are related to regulation or are dependent with regulation. And especially in financial applications, that comes more stronger out. And I started to get more interested in law, mainly because it was very different in the sense that in law you didn't have kind of like very true answer, but it's more about opinions and kind of like with different opinions based on different kinds of assumptions. You have this some sort of a consensus of how things should be, and there's like a lot of room for interpretation, and I was quite excited about that and wanted to learn, and because I felt that could actually bring a lot of strength into my product development and what I'm trying to pursue. And many of these areas, it's quite new. I mean, you're always dealing with regulation, and not just regulation, but many areas. And when you're running a startup, you're in touch with all of these areas, whether you have experience or not, or like a background or education for that kind of things. But you will have to be in touch with regulation. And so I studied in University of Helsinki in Finland, where I'm from. And and during my studies, I just still went back to kind of like product development and software, and just kind of wanted to do something again in fintech. And at some point in my research, I found practically blockchain and started to research more and more, and got super excited and just did one proof of concept application, and somewhere from that kind of like things just exploded, and and practically I had to stop my degree for a while and just focus on the startup, and we had few fundraisings and so forth, and it became kind of like full-time thing for me, and I just had to like on the side continue and finish my degree, and it was kind of like a difficult because you have one leg in the school, and at the same time you're trying to run a business, and you have 30 employees, and you're trying to kind of like keep the chaos together. And yeah, I mean, but definitely it helped me for the whole period, strengthened my abilities to create better products, understand like the business and environment, and kind of like what is the realm that you can build things. Because like I mean, in fintech you can build so many cool things, like if you are in a sandbox, but then when you go to a actual live environment, there's quite a lot of restrictions, and dealing with those, it requires a bit of knowledge in that sense. But I think in the future I will always be building things. It's what I love, it's what I do, but I definitely got good ground from this. And if this startup fails, I can always go back to lawyering. That's always an option.
Yeah, I mean, to be able to run your business alongside studying is admirable, I think. It's quite a lot, even just handling a degree or just one of those things. So yeah, that's impressive. So Susanne, I know that you actually worked in a fintech kind of company before the term was actually coined. So would you mind perhaps describing how your interest in fintech developed over time, and what you kind of see as a difference between back then, before it was actually fintech and it was just a tech company, to today, where we really have this exciting fintech industry?
Definitely. I mean, as I said, I was studying business administration in Vienna, in Austria, and then I did a 1-year MBA exchange program at the University of California in Berkeley. And after being in the MBA program there, I did an MBA summer internship at Tandem Computers in Cupertino, which is in the Silicon Valley there. And at that time, the word fintech didn't exist, but it was a fintech company because the company was serving all the stock markets in the world. But we just called it a supplier, a supplier to the financial services sector. And I think the difference at that time was that you had a clear relationship between the client, the bank, the stock exchange, and the vendor. And the vendor was below the client. The client was more important. And the vendor was like not an equal relationship. While now, 20 years later, with our fintech universe and ecosystem emerging more and more, it is much more, I think, where startups, scale-ups, large financial institutions meet at the same height, eye to eye. They're equally important because you just don't know how quickly a startup can grow. And a few years later, the startup CEO who might have been a small startup when you met him might be able to give you actually a job, and might be the big boss. So things change so quickly. And that's what I learned is it's much more a partnership approach. It's much more respectful, than it was 20 years ago, where it was just a supplier relationship, a vendor relationship. Where it was very much about cutting costs, getting the cheapest vendor coming in and negotiating, to the as much as you could. And now people see it's a strategic, important competitive edge you actually have got when you work with the best fintech companies and they want to work with you. Because of course the best fintech companies have choices. They don't have to work with every bank, and they couldn't work with every bank or every insurance company or every asset manager, but they will choose. They will choose the partners whom they like most. And that's why, at Fintech Circle, what we introduce is a so-called no jerks policy. And I don't know if you know, and probably you know what this means, but I always also use it in my private life. But I think it's important not to deal with jerks because life is too short. So you want to choose the people you're hanging out with, the people you're together, in your private life, also the people you work with and your clients. You want people whom you enjoy to spend time with. And normally those people are respectful, they are kind, the people you enjoy working together. And if this is a two-way relationship, you automatically have got the right ingredients in place to make it a long-term fruitful partnership as well, in the fintech sector. So I think that's really important, and that's one of our philosophies, our values, which we live day in and day out. And I think that also is one thing which changed, like it wasn't like that 20 years ago. Now it's more like that. But of course, it can further improve, 100%.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. I love the idea of the no jerk policy.
Yes,
that's definitely something I'll take forward. Shefali, I'm really interested if you could talk about your experience in working in compliance. I actually watched your TED talk on this topic and I thought it was fascinating. And I was just wondering if you could talk about your experience doing that at Truelayer, and more generally the issues of ethics and compliance in the fintech industry.
Can you hear me okay? Sorry, I lost you there for a bit.
It's okay,
sorry.
Thanks.
So, Amelia, sorry, what was the question about compliance?
Sure, yeah. So, I know you gave a TED talk on working in compliance and ethics and how important that is. And I was just wondering if you could talk about that in your role at Truelayer, and also just the issues of ethics and compliance in the fintech industry right now, and how perhaps you compare that to other industries.
Sure. So I think for us, I think everything that we do really from a compliance perspective, fundamentally, it really is ethics, right? And so you have to kind of, compliance is just codified rules, which are really doing the right thing. And ethics really is just doing the right thing. But I think to Susanne's point, the no joke rule, it's so easy to also parlay that into so many other things, which is be nice to people you work with, do the right thing when, senior people are not in the room, don't bribe people, because that's just basic. But it's just really fundamental things that you kind of have to inherently understand as a human being, and then you take that across to what you do in your business. And so the sad part about compliance and compliance officers is that there's a reason people like me exist, right? There's a reason people in a compliance team exist, and it's because most people in a bank or in finance or in a healthcare or a pharmaceutical are not doing the right thing. And so our job is to look at the rules and say, these are the rules, and this is either legally rules because of your, you've got financial regulation that you have to comply with, or there's FDA rules because you're trying to get an approval for a drug or whatever it might be. But they're rules. And so here are the rules, everybody in the company, and you have to comply with them. And I exist, and people like me exist because we know that people in companies don't follow the rules. And so if everybody did the right thing as they were supposed to, you wouldn't really need a compliance team, and you wouldn't really need compliance officers. And so ethics is really just another way to parlay that into how you do business. The other thing to say about ethics, and I think this is a very broad stroke explanation, is it moves and it flows into things like inclusion and diversity. So if you have to think about, well, how do I make good product and how do I make ethical product? Well, hopefully your users are as diverse as your employee population. If your employee population is not diverse, then I don't know who the hell you're building product for. So it is also the thing of how do you make good product? How do you make fair product right and well? And that really is inherently why you think about fintechs. I wouldn't say fintechs are as ethical as big banks. I wouldn't say they're on the spectrum of the most ethical companies in the world. Like, if they're all degrees of non-compliance and they're degrees of people doing silly things. And I think you hear all the horror stories, whether they're out of London or they're out of Silicon Valley or wherever they are, about how some startups just don't do the right thing. And that has nothing to do with the fact that they're startups or fintechs or health techs or whatever. It's just you have potentially an employee population that are not as great as they ought to be. And so when you think about building your companies or joining a company, you should investigate that, and you should have it front and center of your evaluation and your due diligence, whether you're building a company, hiring employees, taking VC money, or building a product. I mean, and one of an interesting conundrum, and I ask founders this, and I talk to founders about this all the time when they're building their company, is if you were desperate and you have, 30 employees that you have on your payroll and you've run out of money, and SoftBank comes along and says, here's $50 million, would you take it? Now, SoftBank also takes money. One of their LPs is the Saudi Foreign Investment Fund and the Saudi government. And, Saudi Arabia has human rights abuses. Now that. They're an LP in the SoftBank fund. Would you take SoftBank money? Now, you have 20 people to make payroll, because those 20 people are your responsibility. You're going to take the money. Your huge ethos about human rights is going to go out the window. And that's the reality of business, right? And so you have to think about all of these things. And so we always, when we talk to founders, but even when I'm angel investing, I always ask these really hard questions, because you kind of need to know who you're going to bid with on every spectrum. And ethics plays a really important role in that, because you can't really just put it under the carpet and think, oh, it's just going to go away, because it does come up at some point. And as your company grows and your employee population grows, I'm always so fascinated by your generation. I think, the Gen Z generation is so interesting, and you guys are superstars. And it is really, I'm looking at about 3 potential angel investments right now, and all of them are Gen Z founders. And some of the questions they ask me about my philosophy and my beliefs and what do I think is good business. And the other day, one of them, and one is in fintech, and the founder said to me, Shefali, what are your views on climate change? And I was like, I don't know, you're a fintech. What do you care? And he goes, no, but I want to know who you are. And I want to know what you're about. And you're going to be on my cap table. And if you're an idiot, I don't want you on it. And that whole demographic shift is wonderful and fantastic, and I hope you guys do more of it, because they're going to be the future. Great principles, ethics, fairness, justice, that's important, and it's all just
I think it cut out a little bit at the end there. But that was a really interesting answer. I think there's some really great points there about asking difficult questions, and let's go back. Okay, yeah, I think Shefali was having some internet difficulties. But yeah, it kind of goes back to what Stani was saying about when there's not always a perfect answer, as there is in, say, code or mathematics. And Stani, perhaps on that topic, could you talk about how when you're starting a company, how do you go about differentiating yourself among so many of these different fintech startups that are popping up these days? How is your experience of that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there is definitely like stuff we do like to differentiate as a company, but like we focus also on mainly on the kind of like the product itself, like what we are trying to solve, and is someone else solving this particular challenge some way, like kind of like what's the value added that we are trying to have here. So basically, like our goal is to focus on the product and create something that actually helps large scale of people, and kind of like we believe that there is value added to all of those stakeholders that are involved, and it might be retail, it might be more institutional in our field. So that's like one of the things. There's so-called product market fit. So kind of like you want to build something that people are using, and take your product out of the market. You can basically see that there's actually some kind of a gap left after that. So that's one thing. But in terms of like the differentiating from other companies, like as a company, we try to have different kinds of initiatives. Like we have different values that we are trying to build over the time, and kind of like have an objective of changing something. And for us, it's pretty much kind of like changing how finance is today. So in terms of like we're building a blockchain, for us it's quite important value that we believe that like using blockchain technology brings a lot of transparency, democratizes with the transparency, for example, lending and borrowing markets that we are created with this technology. And what's kind of like interesting here is that it's a bit different than traditional fintechs, because what we're trying to kind of like solve is build a better backend for kind of like a banking infrastructure, but not just that, but also kind of like have actual like internet for finance, and that's how basically smart contracts work that we are using. So when they're in the same network, we can communicate with each other. So kind of like we are trying to open up the internet, or the finance into a model that is kind of like reminds more of a internet that we have today, that anyone can plug in and anyone can build and develop, and everything is public in the sense that you can see all the transactions and so forth. And of course, like that's like the whole question, and then we want to build privacy. But I think there's the kind of like takeaway that there's the product side that we want to achieve, and then there's the company side, like what we want to achieve, and also we try to focus in the aspect that like in Aave, like everyone is an individual in the sense that they are making Aave what it is. So the main importance is actually not Aave growth, but like as a company, but personal growth of the team members that are part of Aave. And I think that's one of the kind of like key things that is working very well in our startup, and it helps quite a lot. So kind of like people can grow individually as a professional. Like that is pretty cool, because like when we started 2 years ago, we were way younger, and kind of like there is something we're learning as a team, and people are getting very professional. And probably if you look at blockchain development building, Aave is one of those companies that has one of the most a lot of know-how in the space, and that's really funny, because we were just two developers building something small, and now we're actually in a scale, and that is pretty cool.
Yeah, fantastic. I think there's some really useful takeaways there for students who are looking to perhaps get into starting their own kind of fintech company. I was just wondering if, Susanne, you'd like to add anything, particularly as you come into contact with a lot of entrepreneurs. What kind of qualities do you see in successful ones? And perhaps, yeah, what do you think is needed to start a successful business in fintech?
It's a good question, you know, and I think there are lots of different answers to it. I think one is that often the best entrepreneurs, I think, are the ones who saw and felt the pain point. You know, they felt something is wrong, something doesn't work. Why does it not work? You know, and questioning the status quo and coming up with a solution for it. You know, which they test in the market. Does it not just appeal to myself but also to others? You know, is there a market for it? So I think it's kind of being on one side observant, you know, what happens around you, being able to analyze things, being able to challenge, you know, how things are being done, and coming up with alternative solutions. I think that's one key aspect, you know, of being an entrepreneur. I guess the other key personality attribute is that you have to be positive. You know, in life, you have to take risks, you have to take the chance, because you never know if it works out. And the likelihood, you know, for entrepreneurs that it works out is less than the likelihood it would fail. So if you don't think positively, you would never start a startup, you know, because you would not risk it. You would keep a safe job. So I think you have to be a risk taker, but of course take calculated risks. So don't do anything crazy, you know, but you have to take risks, you know, in life. And I would say the other thing is you have to be resilient, because normally when you look at startup success stories, you just see the end state. You know, you see the state when the person won an award or has, you know, had a wonderful exit, but you don't see the journey. And the journey normally is full of ups and downs. You know, it's successful days and not so successful days, and good days and bad days. And I think the key thing, you know, as an entrepreneur is you have to pick yourself up. You have to be able to motivate yourself to keep going. And you have to be able to motivate others, you know, to lead others to follow on your path, and to be excited to do that in good and in bad times. Almost like being married, you know, in good and in bad times, you're supposed to stick together and really try not to give up. You know, you can always pivot. That's what entrepreneurs always do. You know, if things don't work out, you try to find a different way. You try, you know, if there's an obstacle ahead of you, to try to jump over it, to turn right, turn left, and to get over the obstacle. But you always have to, you know, to keep positive, to try to see there's a future which you can achieve, and you will get there. So I would say it's a couple of things. It's resilience, you know, optimistic attitude, hard work, 100%. You know, being an entrepreneur is not a 9-to-5 job. And so anybody who wants to take it easy and enjoy life, you know, it's probably not, entrepreneurship is not then, you know, for you, because it's harder than being employed. You know, being employed, I found it's less work. It's much less satisfying. So being your own boss is much more fun, much more satisfying, but it's more work. But it doesn't feel like necessarily always more work, because if you enjoy what you're doing and you're doing this on the weekend or on the evenings, it doesn't feel that bad. You know, it feels exciting actually, because you enjoy and you love what you're doing. So it's not, doesn't feel like work necessarily. But I think it's important to be ambitious, you know, to be able to willing to put in the hours and the nights and the weekends to get to where you want to get to. And I think at the end of the day, it's about success, you know, and success is different for all of us. You know, it's different for all of us. And I think we need for ourselves to find what does success mean for us as people, as individuals. And that's what we want to move towards, you know, because it doesn't make sense to follow a footpath on somebody else's journey of success if it's not meaningful to yourself. So I think that's about, you know, listening to your own wishes, to your own needs, to your own dreams, and try to fulfill those in your own life, you know, using your own tools you've got available, your own intelligence, your creativity, but it's finding your own path. You know, your own path is maybe has not been walked on before by anybody else. So you have to do it the first time for yourself, and therefore take risks, you know, but love the journey. And if you don't love it, you change it. You know, that's my philosophy in life. If you don't enjoy what you're doing, it's no point of complaining for it too long. You just change it to something else, so that's the good thing about life. You can always change routes.
Yeah, that's fun. Thank you so much for all that advice. I think that'll be really useful for the people watching. So Shefali, if your internet is holding out, I was just wondering if you could talk
I'm really
a little bit.
sorry how awful my internet is. So I'm so sorry
No
about
worries
that.
at all. This is the challenge of post-COVID life when everything's virtual now, I guess. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the edtech companies that you're involved with. Edtech's a really interesting space, especially now that we are doing everything online, and perhaps why you got involved with those, and if there is any link with your experience in working in fintech that helps you to be successful in the roles you're in there.
Sure. I mean, I think edtech is, it's going to be booming, I think, in the next year to 3 years, because we are now so accustomed to working remotely. We're so accustomed to learning remotely. You can have freshers read stuff, which is very important. So you'll need to do all of the rituals that you'll do at university. But I think the innovative ways that you're learning now is going to be just exponential in terms of growth. So some of it, the edtech companies that I'm involved with, some of them are gaming, so they actually teach young kids and young people how to code, and it's really quite intuitive. Some of them are actually learning how to use your devices, and so one of them actually rewards you for spending less time on your device and more time reading. And so they have like a tie-in with a few bookstores and a few publishing houses, and so we spend an inordinate amount of our time on our phones. And so one of these startups kind of helps you and rewards you and gives you bucks and gives you money and gives you book vouchers and engages you with publications because you spend less time with your voice. That's kind of interesting. There's a whole gamut of work about the future of work, and there's a whole gamut of skills and learning about reskilling. So one of the most disappointing things about this, COVID is catastrophic. Let's not beat around the bush about that. But one of the most horrible and awful stats that has come out of the last 9 or 10 months is that nearly 80% of women have left the labor force and left the working environment. And it's because they now have household responsibilities and childcare and parenting and all that sort of stuff that they now have to do. And so women generally and naturally, I guess, have just now taken a step back and left their careers and now gone back to being at home. So if you fast forward and you can think 3-4 years from now, where hopefully the world is returned to some semblance of normalcy, all of these women have to go back to work. And what are we going to do? Because we can't have so many women not in our labor force and not in employment. And so if you look at 2023 or 2024, you're going to see startups being built today for that horizon to get those women back into work. And whether it's reskilling, whether it's job share, whether it's part-time work, whether it's remote working, whether it's at-home jobs completely. There's so many things that are going to happen where this entire workforce and this entire change is going to be occurring. And a lot of that has to do with education. So you could be, a woman at the moment, and you're an accountant, and you're an accountant at a startup, and oops, you have to now be at home because you can't do the job and do this. Well, maybe you've been at home for a couple of years and you realize, actually, do you know what? I hate accounting. So what else can I do which earns me an income? It takes me, allows me to fulfill my dreams, fulfill my hopes. And as Susanne says, do something that you love, right? So if you hate numbers, for God's sake, don't be an accountant. That's stupid. So what is going to happen in the next 1 to 3 years? And I think for all of you who are thinking right now of maybe becoming founders yourself, you want to look at the sectors and the thesis and the verticals where in 3 years, in 4 years, that's going to change the narrative. It's not about, who's going to make $1 billion, because most companies don't survive. Forget about making $1 billion. It's about what's the product, what's the user, what's the distribution, and what's that going to be. And education is going to be one of those massive things that is going to change the world. And so there's a couple of things at the moment, if you're into that thesis, which is things like course-based online learning. So if you want to learn, I don't know, how to write a cap table or how to raise money, you can go on to the net and you can find courses specifically teaching you how to raise money from a VC or how to design a financial model to get a Series B funding or whatever it might be. There are tons of courses. There's superb platforms like Teachable and what's the other one? There's another one called Code-Based Course or something it's called. But they're all for people to use the skills that they already have, to earn money, and to teach the skill that you already have. So there's this huge overlap between not just education, but also the entire creator economy. And that could be very, very interesting. And so education is just, a subset of the creator idea. And it's very interesting. I think whoever thinks about the good idea of the way of communication first and the way of legitimizing and normalizing distance-based learning is the entity that or is the company that's going to really be flying in 5 years. The last thing I'll say is a really, really cool company that is incubated. I can't remember which university it's out of. It actually might be you guys. That is all about matching students with tutors. Now, if you're your first year or second year and you're a mathematics whiz or you're an economics whiz, and I don't know, a 14-year-old doing GCSEs or whatever it is has to learn how to do this, you can earn an income by teaching them. And then having that platform to match a tutor to a student, and you want, 25, 30, 40, 50 quid an hour, that's kind of interesting. But it's only because startups like this exist to do that and provide that platform and provide that communication. It also depends on very good Wi-Fi. So, don't take my word for it, but I'm just saying there are all these things that are required to make it a very successful business.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think the availability of online resources and learning, especially in technology at the moment, fantastic. I can't imagine not having access to that now. I know it hasn't always been like that, but it's so helpful as a student. Susanne, I wondered if on that topic you could talk a little bit about your passion for kind of education around fintech. I know you've written several books on the topic and related topics. So what kind of motivates you to do that, and why did you first think to start doing that? And now, of course, you've got your film. What was your motivation for that?
Yeah, first I wanted to say everything what Shefali said is really true and excellent, and I believe also the edtech sector is booming and will be booming, in the future, because it's so important to learn and to keep on learning. I remember our parents' generation, they could stop learning as soon as they got a job. In our generation, if we would do that, we would be out of job very quickly, so I think it's key that we keep on learning. And I guess what happened with our first book, the Fintech book, which we started to write 4 or 5 years ago now, the way it started was because I came from a banking background. So I worked for Morgan Stanley for 7 years. Then I worked for Deutsche Bank, for Lloyds. And then I saw this opportunity in fintech. So I joined as a banker, the fintech sector. And so the first thing I did is I went to Amazon to buy a book on fintech, because I thought I want to learn about fintech, but there was not a single book out there. And I thought, how shall I learn about all the things I don't know if there's nothing out there? Then I realized fintech is so complicated, because you've got fintech, for retail banks, you've got fintech for investment banks, for commercial banks, for asset managers. Then you've got fintech in transaction banking, insurance. You have the whole cryptocurrency world, central bank digital currencies, cybersecurity, blockchain, what Stani talked about. So you've got so many different verticals. That's like one axis. We always talk about the fintech cube and fintech circle. And so one axis is a 3-dimensional concept. One axis is the vertical you're working in the fintech sector. The second axis is what type of business model do you use? Is it B2C, business to consumer? Is it B2B, business to business? Is it B2G, business to government, business to regulators? Is it a platform-based business model, 2-sided, 3-sided? Is it a peer-to-peer lending structure? There's so many options, a crowdsourcing platform. So the second axis, is the business model. And the third axis, in order to make it a fintech cube, almost is the technology you use. Do you use data analytics? Do you use blockchain? Do you use AI, machine learning? So you've got a 3-dimensional cube. And normally when you look at a fintech startup, you can look at which cube element they fit in. If they're let's say, a retail banking B2C startup using AI, I mean, they fit into one element of this large fintech universe cube. And therefore, what we started to do, we realized if one person writes a book on fintech, it's very limited because this one person will only talk about their own experience and their own expertise. That's why we chose to crowdsource our books, because we realized that multiple authors will be able to add so much more value and so much more knowledge to a book than one author, a team of authors could do. And we also wanted to share global expertise because, of course, what we experience in Europe, in the UK, is not at all how fintech is being applied in Africa, or in Latin America or in China. So we wanted to have a global book, and that's why we crowdsourced our global knowledge. And that's why we wrote our crowdsourced books. And I think that's the power again of technology, that's possible nowadays. Nowadays, often some of my co-authors I met for the first time at our book launch events in London, when we still could meet in person. And it was amazing because we had 70 authors coming together, all signing our fintech books, and our AI book together. And so these books are very special collector items now because they've got 70 signatures inside of all the authors globally, who met. And that's really nice because you learn from each other. You never stop learning, and you're able to share your knowledge together. And I think it's more fun for the reader too. And at the end of the day, the reader is the client. And I remember when I was at university, there were lots of academic books, but they were quite boring, to be honest, and they were not very practical. And of course, our fintech books are only practical. They are very exciting to read. They are very applicable. You can put them into practice right away. So they're enjoyable. And I think you learn more when you enjoy the process as well. So that was another reason why we decided to make it really, really value added and enjoyable, hopefully, and written by the best experts in the industry.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend anyone who's watching this and wants to know a little bit more about fintech and get a good overview to check that out. I think it's a really interesting idea to crowdsource the writing. Definitely is a great resource as well for everyone who's watching. Finally, I think we've got time for just one more question. So, Stani, could you perhaps talk about what future you see for the fintech industry, particularly with how COVID has impacted the fintech industry and your company, and how you see it changing in the future?
Yeah, I think definitely COVID by itself changes the behavior of the economy and how humans spend free time. I think the interesting part about fintech or finance is that it's a kind of like a connector and a way to settle things. And when it comes to funds, transactions, and also great opportunities. I mean, when it comes to lending and borrowing as well. So I definitely think things become more rapidly digitalized. And this is something which in some governments and in some environments has been going quite well over the past. But I think in some places it's more of a kind of like a wake-up call that now it's kind of like the time if something isn't digital at the moment has to be, and that goes with payments and everything else. And fintech and finance itself, financial technology, it's practically a backbone instrument for everything else. So it's not something kind of like that the whole world and economy kind of like it runs through, but it's more of like a supportive element for everything that we're doing and removing inefficiencies. And the way fintech came more popular is because it really started to remove inefficiencies, for example, in user interface, and actually starting to mold in a way like how humans behave. If you carry mobile and you spend most of your time mobile, it's pretty much you could manage your finances there instead of laptop, for example, always. And all of these things kind of like in terms of financial technologies is molding towards how we behave, and because it becomes digital kind of like more aggressively in services and so forth, it really kind of like starts this kind of like a improvement cycle where things will change very quickly. And we see it kind of in blockchain and decentralized finance very well, because in decentralized finance, whatever Aave is building, someone else can be building at the same time, any part of the world, and deploy that piece of code into the same blockchain network, which practically means that we have like a lot of kind of like there is not much room for inefficiencies, because like if you create products that have some inefficiencies, someone else comes and fixes those and gets liquidity and the network effects and whatnot. So, but I think the future is bright. I think there's a lot of innovation you can do at the space, and there's a lot of room. The challenge is always like to kind of like work with regulation and see like what you can and can't do. But besides that, like, I mean, there's a lot of innovation that can be built, and that's a good thing for everyone who is in the field, because it means that new products and services could be built, old things could be improved, and it's fun. Like fintech is really, really fun.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. And I think, well, hopefully some of our viewers as well will one day be developing the newest technologies in their own startup inspired by this entrepreneurship talk. So thank you all so much for coming along and speaking to me and our viewers today. It's been really interesting, and I think everyone will take a lot from this. So yeah, big thank you, and I hope you all have a lovely day. Bye.
Thanks so much, Emilia. All the